This is a thematic series of webinars on the Zika virus epidemic. It is organized by the Harmonization for Health in Africa Community of Practices in collaboration with WHO Geneva and the Institute of Tropical Medicine Antwerp. The first webinar today is on Zika virus and its biomedical aspects. And our guest speaker is Erika Garcia. She's an epidemiologist working with the WHO in the Pandemic and Epidemic Diseases Department. So I would like to thank Erika for accepting to give this webinar. And without any further delay, we may start.
Thank you, Nadege. Good afternoon to everybody and good evening to some. I understand that there are some who are connected from Fiji, from Kamalaki shores in Fiji. So welcome everybody, and thank you for attending this webinar on Zika virus. My aim today is to present Zika virus. It is an emerging global threat, as some of you may have heard in the news and also in your areas of work. And I will briefly give you a outline of my presentation. We're going to talk about what is Zika virus. I'll talk about the epidemiological aspects of Zika. And then I will go on and talk about the laboratory diagnosis and clinical presentation and how can we prevent and control Zika virus disease. I would like to give you a global update on where we are in terms of the Zika outbreak that is still ongoing, and then pose some questions on what do we know today and what do we not know, and then also what is the risk for further global spread. So to go with what is Zika virus, it's an arthropod-borne virus or arbovirus of the genus Flavivirus of the family Flaviviridae, and it is similar to other arboviruses such as yellow fever, Japanese encephalitis, West Nile, and dengue, and it's transmitted primarily by the Aedes species mosquito. It's an RNA virus, and it's phylogenetically very close to the Spondoweni virus, which is in sub-Saharan Africa and Papua New Guinea. Zika virus has similar epidemiology and clinical presentation and transmission cycle in urban environments as dengue and chikungunya, and it circulates in primates. Now, why is it called Zika? Now, it was first isolated in Uganda in the Zika forest in 1947, and hence this is why it's called Zika virus. And it was discovered during a yellow fever routine surveillance project that was funded at the time by the Rockefeller Foundation. And then a few years later, it was isolated in humans in 1952 in Uganda and Tanzania. And later, it was also isolated in Nigeria. But for many years, from 1947 to 2006, we only saw sporadic human cases, and we found these cases just through seroprevalence studies and virological studies. And we saw that the virus showed up in several countries in Africa and Asia. We did observe in the 60s in the 60s and 70s, that there was a geographic expansion from Africa to Asia. But in all this time, there were no known outbreaks of Zika until 2007. And so this is where I want to start talking about, is bring you up to 2007 to present, where the first time we see an outbreak of Zika was in Yap Island, which is part of Micronesia. 185 cases of a total population of 7,300. And this was in an urban setting. And it caught our attention as WHO at the time because this was unknown that Zika could cause an outbreak, although relatively small in size. And then a few years afterwards, there was an outbreak in French Polynesia, which there was an estimated 28,000 cases which is about 11% of the population of French Polynesia. And then we saw it spread those years, 2013, 2014, to other Western Pacific countries. Now, 2015 is an important year for Zika because this is when we first saw Zika in the South American continent, specifically in Brazil. Brazil started detecting early in 2015 fever and rash. And then in October of 2015, Colombia, north of Brazil, started reporting an outbreak as well. And from there on, we see a rapid geographic dispersion of the virus from late October up to now in 2016 throughout the Americas and the Caribbean. Of note is that in October 2015, Cape Verde also reported an outbreak, primarily in Praia. And then in 2016, there was a fast geographic expansion, as I said, to the other countries. And so a total of, I believe at the time I wrote it, there were 42 countries that have seen the first outbreak of Zika. So how is Zika transmitted? Zika is transmitted through primarily the Aedes aegypti, although we are starting to see that Aedes albopictus could be a potential vector. And as we have seen, Aedes albopictus also transmits other arboviruses, including chikungunya. There are sexual routes of transmission as well. There are several reports of sexual transmission in Zika, which we initially did not think that this was a possible route. But we did see a few studies that report hematospermia. And in particular, there was one case that had high Zika virus RNA load and replicative Zika virus in semen. But virus remained undetectable in their blood sample. And so this suggests that viral replication may have occurred in the genital tract, which is very important. And then today, we see that there are additional countries that are reporting sexual transmission of Zika virus. And so this really begs the question that more studies are needed to understand how long does the virus stay in the semen? Is the virus present in asymptomatic men? Can women spread Zika to sex partners? And is Zika found in other fluids, including saliva and vaginal fluids? So these are the questions that are still unanswered. Zika can also be transmitted through blood, perinatal transmission, transplacental transmission as well, and breastfeeding is not considered a route of transmission, but I put this in the slide just to jog everybody's thinking that this could be thought of a possible transmission route, although as of today, there are no accounts of transmission through breastfeeding. But there are accounts of perinatal transmission and transplacental transmission. For blood transfusion, however, there are still investigations of whether Zika is being transmitted through blood transfusion. There's an ongoing study currently in Brazil. We know that this does happen for West Nile virus. I'd like to put here a map of the global distribution of Aedes aegypti. This map was developed by a research group that are predicting where Aedes aegypti is found. And they use this through mathematical modeling to be able to predict where Aedes aegypti may be proliferating. In dark red or orange, you find that the probability of Aedes aegypti proliferating is 100%. And in blue are areas where it's 0% probability that Aedes aegypti is replicating and proliferating. And so you can see that all continents, including North America and Europe, are detecting potential new habitats for Aedes aegypti. And as Zika is transmitted primarily through this vector, potentially Zika can spread throughout the world and globe, and as we are seeing now. So how do we laboratory confirm Zika? And primarily, I mean, the take-home message on this slide is that currently the primary method of detecting Zika virus is through polymerase chain reaction, basically RT-PCR. You can also use serological tests, ELISA or immunofluorescence, to look for Zika-specific antibodies like IgM in the weeks after a person's illness. Another way to confirm is if you demonstrate a seroconversion or a fourfold rise in Zika-specific antibodies right after infection. But a take-home message on this slide, another one, is that there are many challenges in confirming laboratory diagnosis. And the first challenge is that when in humans, the viremic period is very short. The highest titers of virus are usually present around the time of onset of symptoms. However, we could look at urine as a possible specimen rather than blood because we see that the virus is in urine a lot longer than in blood. Also, antibodies to other flaviviruses such as dengue, yellow fever, and Japanese encephalitis can cross-react, and so whatever test results you're getting is dubious whether it is for Zika or not. Another challenge is that there aren't any commercial diagnostic kits, although they're becoming available now. There's none yet available for countries to purchase to make sure that they've all been subjected to rigorous external evaluation. But these are in the pipeline, and they're working hard on it. WHO has extended its emergency use assessment and listing process to include Zika diagnostics. And if anyone has been following the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, this was a process that was used to obtain diagnostic kits, rapid diagnostic kits for Ebola. And so now we're using this mechanism for Zika. So clinically, what does Zika look like? It's like dengue. Basically, we get fever, maculopapular rash, conjunctivitis, arthralgia, which lasts from 2 to 7 days. The illness is usually mild, and the treatment is symptomatic. But, however, Zika virus infection was considered benign until the 2013-2014 outbreak in French Polynesia and in 2015. So prior to these outbreaks, it was considered a benign illness, but then in particular, French Polynesia started reporting Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a neurological disorder. And then later in Brazil in 2005, they reported congenital brain abnormalities in newborns. And so here is a picture of a traveler who had gotten infected with Zika virus, and you could see the maculopapular rash, and that's the purpose of this slide. And here is what we're talking about in terms of what raised our attention about congenital brain abnormalities. Brazil started reporting significant increase of microcephaly in November of 2015, and they stated that this was associated spatiotemporally with the Zika outbreak that they had in 2015. I put a map of Brazil, and in the dots, these are the number of cases of microcephaly, and if you can notice, on the northeast part of the country, the cases are clustered right at this area, which is an area called Pernambuco. And on the left are the pictures of, two pictures of a baby that was born with microcephaly, which is basically a small circumference of the head. And this is a graph of the microcephaly cases in relation to when Zika was first confirmed. And this is the basis for which Brazil highly suspected that Zika was the cause of their microcephaly outbreak. So to date, the question is, okay, so does microcephaly cause, does Zika virus cause microcephaly? And right now that question is still valid. But we do know that to date, there are countries that are reporting microcephaly in conjunction with Zika virus outbreaks. And you could see here, I put a table, that Brazil has reported as of the 20th of April, 1,113 cases. And you could see the following countries: Cape Verde, Colombia, French Polynesia, Martinique, Panama, and Slovenia, and the US. They're reporting microcephaly cases, but in the single digits. So this is something, a food for thought for everybody to think about throughout my presentation. With the US, I just want to note the two cases that they've reported are women who were living in Brazil and in a country in Central America, and then when they went to the United States, they delivered their babies, and the US reported these as microcephaly in the US. In addition to microcephaly, another thing that raised WHO's concern was an increased report of Guillain-Barré syndrome. And just briefly, just to define in case anybody is interested in knowing a little bit more about what this neurological syndrome is, it's basically when your own body attacks the peripheral nervous system. GBS is typically triggered by infections, and we've seen this with other arboviruses. This results in muscle weakness, and 25% of GBS patients require intensive care, and 3 to 5% die. So it could be potentially a serious disorder. So in 2013 and 14, as I stated earlier, French Polynesia reported increases of GBS cases following Zika emergence. And again, we received a spatial temporal association between Zika and the cluster of GBS, like we saw with in Brazil for microcephaly. Although to date, the 13 countries that have reported GBS with possible association to Zika are not reporting clear trends of Zika virus. So this still needs to be investigated more. Just to note, and maybe a significance to the health system strengthening sector, managing GBS has great implications to the health system. Much training needs to be done to healthcare workers, and also in risk of death, a lot of supportive care needs to be given to GBS patients so that we can diminish any chances of death. Also, intravenous immunoglobulin therapy needs to be administered, which requires additional training for healthcare workers. And also, we need to have sufficient hospital beds for severe cases. So I want to talk a little bit about causality. As I was alluding to earlier, does Zika cause microcephaly and Guillain-Barré syndrome? So in this year, we know there are reports of adverse pregnancy outcomes, there are congenital anomalies, there are neurological syndromes. So we do know that, and we do know that these countries have also reported Zika outbreaks. But the research that has been ongoing to understand if and how Zika virus infections affect the nervous system have provided some insight. And of particular note, there's a prospective study that compared ultrasounds in pregnant women with Zika and then ultrasounds in women who had rash but due to other causes, not due to Zika. And what they found was that microcephaly was found more in women who had Zika. And then another finding is that 9 out of 93 neonates studied in Brazil, they found Zika in the fetal and neonatal tissue. So again, although these epi studies seem to support that Zika is a cause, Zika causes this microcephaly situation that we saw in 2015-2016, it isn't definitive. There is consensus that Zika virus is a cause of microcephaly, but not necessarily the cause of what we saw in Brazil. And if you recall on my earlier slide, Brazil was reporting 1,000 cases of microcephaly, and the other countries are reporting single digits. So the question is, did something happen in Brazil in addition to Zika that may have caused this increase in microcephaly? So these are questions that are still being answered. So although evidence is accumulating over time, causality cannot be established just with these epi-studies alone that I've briefly summarized in my second bullet point on the slide. We need to have controlled experiments, for instance, animal study models. And these need to complement what we're seeing in the epi-studies to really be able to say that there's a cause and effect that's being made. But yet, I just want to highlight that there is scientific consensus that Zika can cause a microcephaly, but is it the reason what we saw, the phenomenon of what we saw in Brazil? In terms of GBS, there's also scientific consensus that Zika has some association with GBS, but yet we need to study further exactly what is the mechanism of how the virus is attacking the cells, and how is that cascading the event of an immunological disorder. So I'm going to go next to prevention and control measures, just so that everybody could be well aware of how we do vector control during an outbreak of Zika. As I said, the primary way of getting Zika is through the vector. So we need to have basically a barrier between the vector and people. And so we see that the proximity of the mosquito to human habitation is what is a significant risk factor for Zika virus infection. And so prevention and control relies on reducing mosquito breeding sites and reducing the contact between mosquitoes and people. So we could do that, for instance, those people who are sleeping during the day, for instance, children or the sick and elderly, they can use mosquito nets. We can also reduce adult mosquito populations and also reduce some of the habitats where the mosquitoes are reproducing and basically reducing the larval sites. And also we could communicate to people that they should use personal protective measures such as clothing and insecticides so that they can prevent from getting bit by the mosquitoes. Now, during outbreaks, though, vector control is very important. One of the major ways to do this is by engaging with the community so that they could do community activation and reducing larval sites. This is what we call source reduction measures. And we need to have intersectoral participation at all levels of the government and prioritize the elimination of the most productive breeding sites, such as drums and roof gutters and tires. And also we need to control the adult mosquitoes by doing house screening, using repellents, space spraying, and suitable insecticides, although we, WHO recommends this to be done only during outbreaks. As I said, we need to create a barrier between the mosquito and people, and so one way of doing that is by putting on protective clothing, using repellents, insecticides. For the sexual activity in terms of risk of sexual transmission, WHO right now is recommending that all Zika patients and their sexual partners should receive information about contraceptive measures, the use of condoms, and safer sexual practices. Access to contraceptive services should be provided, and also sexual partners of pregnant women living in or returning from areas where Zika has been circulating should use safe sex practices. As most infections are asymptomatic, men and women living in areas where Zika is circulating should consider adopting safer sexual practices when they resume sexual activity. So I've given an overview about Zika virus disease, but I'd like to give you just basically a picture of where we are today globally. So there are 42 countries that are experiencing a first outbreak of Zika virus, and 17 countries have reported evidence of Zika virus prior to 2015. So the 42 countries are from 2015 and 2016, and the 17 countries are before 2015. And there are 7 countries that have now reported evidence of person-to-person transmission, and these countries do not have viral circulation. And I put here a reminder to talk about Cape Verde, and this is a particular interest to West Africa, just to let you know that the outbreak in Cape Verde that occurred in late 2015 and early 2016 was due to Zika virus that was of the African strain and not the Asian strain. And this outbreak did not seem to have such an explosive effect as it did in other island countries, as in Western Pacific islands. So here is a table of all the countries, and basically I'd like to point you to the total number of countries, including those that were prior to 2015, and then also the current ones. It's a total of 59 countries, and I don't expect, this is a very busy slide, but I would like to point out that Argentina, Chile, Peru, US, France, Italy, and New Zealand are the countries that are reporting person-to-person transmission. And these are areas where the Aedes aegypti is not proliferating or circulating. And this is just a map, and hopefully these slides can be shared with you, and you can have these slides for future reference. Also, these are countries and territories currently reporting microcephaly, and we have a total of 7 locations. I've already presented this slide earlier in my presentation. And in Guillain-Barré syndrome, we currently have 8 countries that are reporting an increase in incidence of GBS. However, there are 5 countries that have reported GBS, but they're telling us it is not an increase in GBS incidence, but they are just reporting that they do have GBS cases that are below what they would be expecting on an average annual rate. So what do we know and what do we not know about Zika? And basically what we know is that the virus circulates very rapidly, and this Asian strain has not yet reached Africa or the northern parts of the United States, and Europe. We're expecting a summer soon. The question is, will it go? And so far, the way this virus has been behaving in South America and the Caribbean is that we should be expecting the virus to arrive in Africa, southern parts of Europe, southern parts of the U.S., and maybe some parts of the northern regions of the U.S. where Aedes aegypti is now circulating. And like dengue and chikungunya, it causes large outbreaks, especially in urban settings. But there's a lot that we don't know about Zika. We really don't know the natural history of the disease, the full spectrum of clinical severity. We don't know. For now, we think that usually Zika virus causes a mild illness, but are there cases of fatal deaths, fatalities due to Zika virus alone? We don't know. We need to know more about the epidemiology of Zika virus, the incubation period, what are the reservoirs. I talked about primates, that originally we saw that Zika virus does affect primates, but what are the natural reservoirs? What other vectors other than Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus could be involved? And what is the role of asymptomatic infections? How can we treat Zika? How does Zika interact with dengue? So if a person has had dengue infection in the past or yellow fever in the past, or if they've been vaccinated with yellow fever, once they get infected with Zika, what happens then? What we just don't know, is there a possible association of Zika with all these neurological complications? And although the evidence seems to say, yes, Zika can cause these clinical neurological complications, is it the reason what happened in Brazil, and how can we reduce that? So lastly, and this is what I was alluding to just earlier, this is a slide that we take from the Yellow Fever Initiative, where we see that globalization is definitely an issue for us, for the world. One person that is traveling from West Africa can arrive in New York City in 16 hours, and another person can go to Delhi in 14 hours. And so although we're all traveling, there are also other factors that we need to consider. Climate change, which is why we see 80s populations surging in new geographical areas. Trade, is trade facilitating the spread of Zika? What happened? Why did Zika all of a sudden pop up in 2013 when for years and years it was pretty sporadic? It didn't cause a public health problem. Now it did. So is this because now we are much urbanized in the world? And so these are the questions that we need to ask. And so I leave this this presentation just with a few links, and here are some resources that you could refer to in case you would need some technical guidance documents, some of the situation reports, and just some basic and scientific information on Zika that we know today. So that is the conclusion of my presentation, and I want to thank everybody for their attention. Are there any questions?
So thank you very much, Erica, again, for this very interesting and informative presentation. There seems to be a lot of things that we still don't know on the Zika virus. So I'm going to ask the participants to, if you have any questions, just raise your hand by clicking on the icon on the far left. So once you raise your hand, we'll be able to give you well, to unmute you so you can ask your question.
Je suis Christophe from Public Health Institute Lapa.
If I could ask a question maybe to the audience, is that okay, Nadege?
Sure, Erica.
Just in general.
Mais est-ce que c'était vraiment un chat en Grèce qui vous a écrit?
Excuse me, there seems to be someone.
Très très petit.
There seems to be someone whom we can hear. Can you, Carlos, can you please unmute everyone else?
Non, ne vous faites pas de soucis. Profitez du temps. Au revoir.
Carlos, can you please unmute? Speaking and we don't know who that is.
I've unmuted all. I will remute all now because we have too much background noise.
Okay, Erica, so please, yes, do ask your question.
Yeah, I just was interested in understanding the background of some of the participants. Maybe you know this, Nadege. Are most participants from the health system strengthening sector, or do we have a few epidemiologists online? I'd just like to get a feel as to the audience, and that was my question.
Okay, so to respond to Erica, can I ask, okay, Carlos?
Yes.
So I think, can you unmute?
I've muted
yourself?
everyone, so I
But
don't
yourself,
know
I think it's coming from you. Yes, thank you. Okay, it's not from you, Carlos, and it's from Erica. So
no, it's from someone else. I'm trying to see if there's anyone else I should mute, but there is not. In the meantime, we have a question from Kamal Kishore.
Yes. Kamal is asking, how did Zika spread from French Polynesia to Brazil? This is a good question. There is a paper stating that Brazil was hosting a mass gatherings event, specifically some type of a sporting event where they hosted from different countries of the Western Pacific to Brazil. And it was during the time that the Western Pacific region was having the Zika outbreak, specifically in French Polynesia, and they did have French Polynesian participants in the sporting event. Now, there is some people in Brazil, some epidemiologists from French Polynesia, that do agree with this hypothesis, but it's not proven. And we do know that the virus that is currently circulating in the Americas, in Brazil as well, is the same as the one that was circulating in French Polynesia. Another hypothesis is that this was due to trade. As we know, there are airplanes, flights that go to and from Brazil into the Western Pacific region, and perhaps through aircraft we get mosquitoes that are infected that end up being basically transported to a new territory or a new area. So this is the hypothesis, but we do know through genetic studies that it is the same strain as in French Polynesia. Over.
Okay, thank you, Erica. If anybody else has a question, you can either type your question on the chat box, or you can just raise your hand on the icon on the left. In the meantime, Erica, I have a question.
Yes.
And that is the fact that we seem not to know much about this virus.
Yes.
And I think it came as a surprise that it can cause some diseases, like the neurological diseases you talked about.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, is the fact that we don't know much about the disease linked to its spread, its rapid spread currently? Maybe if we had known more about it before, we would know how to control the disease. Do you think that our lack of knowledge at this current time is a factor as well for its rapid spread?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you pose an important question because we don't know much about Zika, and but we do know that it's an arbovirus, and it belongs to the same family as dengue. And if we know about dengue, it is rampant. Dengue is hyper-endemic in Latin America. It causes large outbreaks throughout the world. In Asia, it causes large outbreaks in the Western Pacific region. So we know these viruses are being transmitted through the mosquito. Now, what caused, I guess the reason is, why don't we know enough about Zika if we knew of its existence in 1947? And basically, because it caused little number of cases, only 14 cases prior to 2007, 14. So because of that, there was very little interest. There was no money. Nobody was interested in learning about Zika. Why does anybody want to learn about a virus that's not going to cause a lot of infections in people? And so there's no funding, and of course there's no interest. But as soon as it hit in 2015, 13, 15 in Brazil, and especially when we saw this microcephaly in Brazil, it was such an alarm that if Zika does cause this phenomenon that we saw in Brazil, what does this mean for the world? And this is why WHO declared an emergency on the 1st of February. If we knew how to control Zika, if we knew how to control dengue, then I think we would have a better handle on these arboviruses. But I think we should not just look at Zika. We need to look at the other arboviruses. We need to find innovative ways of controlling the mosquito, and because this is the primary route of how we get Zika. So this is the thing: how can we be innovative in controlling dengue and chikungunya. And
okay. Thank you. We have a couple of questions from the participants. We have a first question from Mr. Jackson Denke, and he wants to know the possibility of making rapid tests for diagnosis, specifically for in the context of low and middle income countries.
Yes, currently they're having 8, I don't want to say companies, but let's say 8 research groups are currently working on a rapid diagnostic test. It's in its early phase, but it's going through an emergency process. And this is similar to the process that we saw in Ebola. And basically, we're reactivating this, making sure that a rapid diagnostic test can be developed as soon as possible. What I'm fearful of is this strain that is circulating in the Americas. Will it go to Africa? Will it go to West Africa? Will it arrive there? I think it's a matter of time. The question is, what will happen? Is this strain any worse than the strain that we've seen in Africa in the years past? And we don't know. We just we need to continue doing our studies.
Okay, so there are 2 questions that are a little bit similar here. So a question from Karen. She wants to know if the Zika strain in Brazil is the same as the one in Cape Verde. And then Alison Kelly would like to know if the Asian strain, if it's expected to hit the African continent, would there be some sort of like combination, a combined version of these 2 strains? That's the Asian strain and African strain.
Yeah.
And could that be more, could it be more virulent in a way?
Yeah. So the one question about genetic mutation, and so far the phylogenetic analysis of Zika virus in Cape Verde and in Brazil are different. So Cape Verde is the African strain, and the one that started in Brazil and that is now throughout the Americas, that one is the Asian strain. Now the question is, can you have a combination of the 2? And the answer is that the virus is very stable in that respect, so we don't expect there to be some genetic mutation and combination. It took a while for the African strain to diverge and become an Asian strain. It took years and years for that. So there seems to be some genetic stability in this.
Okay. So thank you. We have another question from Sabine, and this has got to do with abortion. She says that WHO obviously allows abortion in the case of a Zika infection, but in some countries abortion is illegal.
Yeah.
So are there any other dispositions that WHO may have in such circumstances?
So WHO stands on so basically when it comes to abortion, it's a very political issue, and every member state is free to set their policies on abortion as they wish. There are many countries throughout the world that terminate pregnancy if the mother is at risk and if there are extreme deformities, abnormalities in the fetus. And but these are laws, and these are laws defined by the countries, and the countries are free member states. So WHO's position is not yes, do the abortion if you have Zika. In no way did WHO ever state that. What WHO has communicated to the countries is that every country has to implement their policy as they see fit. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yes. There's a question from Kamal who wanted to discuss further about how did the Zika virus get to Brazil. And so he says, it's unlikely that there was an efficient transfer of Zika from French Polynesia to Brazil, since there aren't any direct flights to Brazil. So basically, adaptability of Zika so far away with no evidence of this spillage. Yeah, like I said, there's this, it's a hypothesis that it was through people. Oh, another question, or another important, maybe another hypothesis to come out question is, how about those people that travel to Brazil that are not sick, so there are no symptoms of Zika, but they have Zika infection? So these are called the asymptomatic cases. And so do they play a role in Zika transmission? And this is another hypothesis, so maybe this could explain. So it's not maybe air flights transporting vectors. Maybe it's just the people who are going to Brazil for different reasons, tourists, travelers with infection but with no symptoms, that may be contributing to the emergence of Zika in new geographical territories. I mean, we just don't know.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think there's another question as well, or maybe it's quite a long question from Karen. She says, today one of the large Brazilian newspapers reported that the latest Brazilian Ministry of Health EPI report states that the largest number of Zika cases in Brazil is now in the state of Rio de Janeiro. Okay, the Olympics starts in August. Brazilian and other authorities do not see the large conglomerations of people in Rio, okay, for Olympic events as a threat. So due to lower temperatures in August and thus less mosquitoes, what do you think about Zika spread and the Olympics?
Well, the Olympics will be during a time when it's going to be cold. So basically the wintry months of the southern hemisphere. I think that for political reasons, Brazil is stating that there's no risk. WHO, on a technical standpoint, would say, well, no, dengue, chikungunya, and now Zika do circulate in Brazil. I don't think the Olympic Games is just in Rio, although I'm not very informed about the Olympic Games, but I recall hearing that the Olympic Games are also in other places in Brazil and other states. So the question is, will those states have circulating dengue virus or Zika? And so the risk is always there. Now the question is, will this be a deterrent for travelers to go to Rio? This is a big question. I don't know. To be honest, the risk for international spread has already occurred. I mean, the thing is, the risk is really for the Africa, southern parts of Europe, and again, the southern and northeastern parts of the U.S. That's where the risk is. I think Zika is already in Brazil.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's another question from Jackson. Do you think there could be a genetically linked factor that predisposes the Brazilians to microcephaly in addition to the Zika virus?
Yeah, excellent question. Exactly, and that's exactly what we need to think about, because this is the Americas, the Latin American and Caribbean population are genetically, immunologically naive. They have never seen this virus in this area, and so maybe this is what's contributing this upsurge of Zika and its rapid spread. And we've seen this with other types of infectious diseases, where immunologically naive populations are most susceptible, and they get severe reactions. So I don't know if it's genetically linked, but definitely immunologically naive populations that could be an explanation. We saw this when the Americas was colonized by some of the European countries, where we see smallpox basically killed off many populations of South Americans and the indigenous populations of North America. And if I could add, so if there is maybe, the question is there protection in African populations, immunologically and from their history of their viral circulation and their endemic levels of arboviruses in the African countries, are these populations already protected? So if they see, if Zika virus Asian lineage is introduced in Africa, will there already be immunological protection in the population? Or is it going to be really different, and will the African populations be affected like in South America? So we just don't know, but this is food for thought.
Okay. Thank you so much, Erika. I don't know if there are any more questions. I don't think so, because I am not getting any more questions. But thank you so much for this very, very interesting presentation. And I'd like to thank the participants as well for being present today. This is the first of a series of 3 webinars. So the second webinar on Zika and the health systems response will be on the 12th of May. So thank you very much, and I think you all received the presentation slides.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.